have a short, thank you, great, there we are, recording right on cue. And then we'll have some introductions of who we are and the launch of the report, and then a short presentation from Shannon Thomson, who's the research manager at Orchid Project. And she's going to share with us some of the key findings of the report. That will then be followed by an introduction to our panelists today, and a short panel discussion just unpacking some of those key themes from the Ethiopia report. We will then open up the panel discussion to a Q&A. So that's a chance for you to ask the questions that you want to know and dive into more depth about either the research report or some of the responses that the panelists have had in the panel discussion. It's important to note that to ask a question, there is a box again at the bottom of your screen. There's a panel that says Q&A. Please write your questions in there and not in the chat box provided. Write it in the Q&A box. That just helps us manage your questions and make sure we get to every and each one of them. So help us to help you to ask the questions in the right way. So yeah, please answer the Q&A. Please put your questions in the Q&A box. And the chat box is just there for you to introduce yourselves and share any comments that you may have. So feel free to go and say hi in there right now and introduce yourself and say hi to the panelists too. Whilst you're doing that, I will introduce myself and a bit about the report. So I am Kimberly. I am a consultant for Orchid Project, who today are launching the Ethiopia Country Profile. This is a webinar discussion which is addressing the social desirability and social identity in female genital mutilation or cutting programming in Ethiopia. I am moderating today's webinar. I have worked with Orchid Project over the last 5 years, and Orchid Project are hosting this event. They were founded in 2011 to catalyze the global movement to end female genital mutilation and cutting. Recently, they merged with research organization 28 Too Many to deliver more research and reports about trends and shifts and laws on female genital mutilation or cutting, and the team are sort of constantly producing and updating research and information. This webinar is part of disseminating and sharing that information around the world to those who need it most, so that we can better improve and inform programming to end female genital mutilation around the world. You will see that on some of the cards today, there is the hashtag no excuse. That is part of Orchid Project's campaign for 16 days of activism, calling for no excuse not to fund research to end female genital mutilation or cutting. So we're running a campaign. Feel free to share that hashtag and check out our socials or our website for more information on that. So yeah, that is a bit about Orchid Project and a bit about what we're doing today. Thank you so much for joining. And I think now, without any further ado, I can hand over to my wonderful colleague, Shannon Thomson, who is the research manager at Orchid Project. Shannon, if you'd like to just give 2 lines introducing yourself and then take us into the presentation on the key findings of the Ethiopia report. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. And my apologies for the late start, but thank you for your patience. When technology works, it's amazing. And when it doesn't, it's certainly tricky. So thank you so much for being patient with us. As Kimberly said, my name is Shannon Thomson. I am the research manager at Orchid Project. I originally joined 28 Too Many, and we had the opportunity to merge together 28 Too Many and Orchid Project as one organization. So we now work within the research team at Orchid Project, and it's great to be all part of one organization together. So I have the privilege of sharing with you the key findings from the Ethiopia Country Profile Update report today. And just want to thank you so much for your time and for being here with us. Can move to the next slide. So just as an overview, my presentation will first go into how our report was compiled, what's happening with FGMC in Ethiopia, give some insight into what the data is saying, what the key drivers appear to be, and then some framing for how we can move forward. And that framing will really help us as we move into the panel discussion. We have an incredible group of guest speakers with us today who are going to help to unpack some of the theme that we've set for today's event, which is around social desirability and social identity, and how those impact programming and policy for FGMC work in Ethiopia. So we can move to the next slide. So this report is a country profile update report. So it builds on the report that was done in 2013. And what we did was a literature review of academic and gray literature. We looked at gender and social norms, political context, explored what's happening in terms of progress towards SDG goals and national statistics, and then had the opportunity to do interviews with grassroots activists, community-based organizations, and implementing organizations working to end FGMC in Ethiopia. And then we built on that to look at the DHS data between 2000 and 2016 and conducted a comparative analysis of that data. So the report is available, and we'll share it with you in the chat so that you can find the links to that. The full report is in English. The key findings and executive summary are available in both English and Amharic. So I will go through some of those key findings now, just in summary, and you can find more detail in those reports. Next slide, please. So overall, the prevalence of FGMC in Ethiopia is decreasing from 79.9% to 65.2%. But as we know, the population in Ethiopia is very large and is growing. So the number of girls at risk of FGMC is still very high. We move to the next slide. Orchid Project estimates that 33 million girls and women were at risk in Ethiopia as of 2016. So the reason for it being 2016 is because that's the latest DHS data that we were able to utilize. But this is the largest absolute number of girls and women in Eastern and Southern Africa, and it's the third highest globally after Indonesia and Egypt. So we want to recognize the decrease in prevalence, but also acknowledge the shifting dynamics of population and the effect that that has on the absolute number of women and girls affected. Next slide.
Shannon, I'm just going to hop in. If we could take it just a fraction slower, so our interpreter.
Yes, sure. My apologies.
No, don't be. I'm loving the haste, but fraction slower, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So when we look at the map of Ethiopia, we can see that there are some distinct hotspots, areas in Eastern Ethiopia with higher prevalence rates above 90%. That's in the Afar region and the Somali region. But once again, considering population of each of these regions, we can see that the highest number of women and girls affected is in Amhara, Oromia, and SNNPR, despite having prevalence rates of 60 to 70%. So there's about 4 to 9 million girls in each of those regions that are affected by FGMC. Next slide. Most women and girls report having undergone cutting with flesh removed, but 17.9% don't know what type of cut they underwent. This is often when girls are cut at a very young age and are not aware of the type of cutting that they've had. Next slide. So when we explore the data and when we explore what's happening in terms of response, we can see that there is a link between education and FGMC. So as educational attainment rises, the likelihood of FGMC decreases. So it's most common amongst women and girls with limited education and least common at the higher levels. But the link between socioeconomic status and FGMC is not quite as clear. Over time, there's become a widening gap between the higher and lower wealth quintiles, but those in the middle are fairly static, and there hasn't been a lot of change between 2000 and 2016. So that relationship is not direct. There is a widening gap in prevalence between rural and urban households, being more prevalent amongst rural households and less prevalent amongst urban. And most girls are cut before the age of 5, but 20% are cut between the age of 5 and 9. Next slide, please. What we saw strongly in the data and what we presented in the report is that prevalence in Ethiopia is most strongly influenced by ethnic identity. And you can see in this graph the variations of prevalence between ethnic groups. And this also affects the age of cutting as well as type of cutting. Next slide, please. When asked directly, 17.5% of women and 11.1% of men report that they believe FGMC should continue. Those are fairly low. Most people are saying that they think it should stop. However, a study was conducted to use indirect research methods by Professor Mhairi Gibson and her colleagues. And what that exposed is that the levels of support for FGMC are significantly higher when using the indirect questioning methods. And Professor Mhairi Gibson will be able to speak more to that study and what it was able to uncover. But this highlights the issue of social desirability and what happens in research around some of those findings. FGMC is strongly linked with marriageability and ethnic identity, as I've already said, but these are key security drivers for women and girls. Many uncut girls face severe social exclusion and social risks. And there were some reports of girls who were begging for their parents to take them for cutting in order to secure marriage prospects and their own economic security for the future. Next slide, please. So just in summary, the key drivers are around ethnic and social identity. So when we think about programming, it's critical to be able to engage with some of the norms that shape both ethnic and social identity, linked to marriageability, but with very clear links to economic security through marriageability and through social conformity and expectation. And all of those are themes that we want to explore in the panel discussion that's coming up next. The criminal code in Ethiopia does contain provisions against FGMC, and the government of Ethiopia has committed to eradicating the practice, and with a national costed action plan, but that commitment is to eradicate it by 2025. So even with significant acceleration, that goal is not possible. Next slide, please. So thinking about how we move forward, in our report, we recommend that the government increases its support of FGMC work to be able to reach its commitment. So I think there's just to press play on that slide. That the government of Ethiopia increases its funding commitments towards eliminating, that we improve the availability of sub-regional data to be able to direct resources, that we engage with the social and gender norms through community dialogue, and that we improve research through indirect questioning methods. And that within programming, there is a focus on economic strengthening and economic empowerment to reduce those social risks for uncut women and girls. Next slide, please. So finally, the key questions that we want to shape in the panel discussion are to understand what impact indirect questioning methods have had on data and research in Ethiopia, and what the way forward is for getting a more accurate understanding of the practice and addressing this issue of social desirability. And then exploring through programming and policy how we can de-link FGMC from social identity, and what impact intergenerational dialogues between youth and elders have had towards that goal. We also want to explore what role there is for more integrated programming, particularly FGMC and SRHR in Ethiopia, and also work on household economic strengthening. So I will pass back to Kimberly, who will invite our panelists and explore some of those questions. But thank you so much.
Oh, I think we might have just lost Shannon, but that's okay. I'm here to jump in. I'll just send a thank you out to Shannon for that wonderful presentation. It was really concise and really helpful. And now I will introduce our panelists. So we have 3 panelists. Oh, hey, Mhairi. Okay. So we have 3 panelists who have joined us today to discuss in further detail the findings of reports and how it impacts and affects their work to end female genital mutilation or cutting, or their research in Ethiopia. So we'll start, if Lulit, you could just spend 2 sentences introducing yourself and who you are, and then we'll introduce the other panelists. So Lulit, if you could go first. Thanks.
Thank you, Kimberly. I hope you can hear me. My name is Lulit. Okay. So good morning and good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're located. I'm representing TaYA, previously called Talent Participation, where I work as a child advocacy officer.
Great. Thank you so much. That's really, really helpful. Okay, Dr. Mhairi, could you introduce yourself, please, if you may?
Hi, everyone. My name is Mhairi Gibson. I'm an anthropologist based at the University of Bristol, and I've been involved in doing fieldwork in South Central Ethiopia for the past 20 years in collaboration with Addis Ababa University. Nice to see you all.
That's really great. I'm actually afraid I misspoke. I said we had 3 panelists, but actually we've just got these lovely 2 today. So I think let's kickstart into our panel discussion. So the first question I'm going to send right back over to you, Mhairi, if that's okay. So I just want to ask, within your research in Ethiopia, you found that using an indirect questioning method uncovered higher levels of support for female genital mutilation or cutting within Ethiopia than when participants were asked directly about their views on the practice. I just wondered if you could share a bit more with us about that indirect questioning method you used and what you found related to support of FGMC through this method, please. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Kimberly. So I suppose the reason why we started our work really was based on the fact that we'd been collecting data in one community over a number of years and identified that women might tell us one year that they were cut and the next year that they were uncut. So there was a question around whether there was some social desirability in terms of people reporting when they were asked directly about their cutting status. So we spent some time trying to sort of look into whether there were kind of indirect questioning methods that we could use that would give us much more accurate and reliable information and data on cutting and people's preferences for it. And we trialed a number of different methods, but the one that we settled on was called the list experiment. And this is a technique that's been used in the global north by sociologists and politicians who are interested in voting and gang membership and other kinds of sensitive behaviors, but had never really been used in the context of sub-Saharan Africa, and certainly not in relation to sensitive women's health issues. So basically what these techniques do is they're designed specifically to mitigate against some of the problems associated with social desirability bias when it comes to sensitive survey topics. And it establishes population level responses or answers. So the individual who's taking part in the study doesn't personally have to reveal their own status or preference to the interviewer. So in other words, it allows people to answer questions under a veil of anonymity. So what we did is we combined these indirect methods with traditional direct questioning methods to establish whether we could get a better response. And obviously, we also wanted to see whether there was a discrepancy between how people answered directly and how people answered indirectly, to get a sense of whether people were likely to conceal their attitudes with regards to FGMC. So we did our first study in 2016. We had about 1,600 people. We've repeated the study on smaller sample sizes. And we asked people about the desirability of FGMC for their daughters. And we also asked about daughters-in-law as well. And I don't know how much detail you want to go into the techniques, but I can talk a bit more about them if you want to. But in terms of the results, what we identified is when we asked people directly, only about 7% of people were prepared to answer openly that they supported FGMC. But when we used the indirect list experiment, we found that levels of support were 3 times higher. So in this community, actually over 20% of people supported FGMC when they knew their answer would be anonymous. So this obviously indicates, an attempt to conceal true attitudes and beliefs with regards to FGMC when you use those traditional direct questioning methods. We were also, because we had a large sample size, able to look at subgroups within the community to see whether there were certain kinds of people that had stronger support or were more slow down. Yeah. So we looked at subgroups within the community to see whether certain kinds of people were more likely to support FGMC or more likely to hide it when asked directly. And we found, to our surprise, I have to admit, that it was educated people. So if you asked people directly and looked at the results, you might get the impression that the people with education were least likely to support the practice. However, when we used the indirect survey technique, we found that educated people were equally likely to support the practice, just more likely to conceal it when they're asked directly. So this raises some really interesting questions around, whether raising awareness, education campaigns actually are successful, deliver the kind of intended benefits, and rather what might be happening is people go underground to avoid detection if they're given more information on a topic.
That's absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Dr. Mhairi. Just amazing how people's responses change according to how you answer the question and sort of finding how we can find true and accurate data. I mean, just amazing work. Lulit, if you ever want to jump in and sort of add, feel free, but I will ask the next question directly to you. So Lulit, moving over to you, within your work at TaYA, how have you engaged across generations, working both with youth and elders, to address the issue of female genital mutilation or cutting, and to shift the narrative of female genital mutilation or cutting's role within social identity?
So for TaYA, as a youth organization, to begin with, we have a principle of promoting youth adult partnerships. So it's not just the FGMC, but anything that we do, with everything, all our advocacy projects, they ensure that youth adult partnership is in practice. So that's a principle that we try to promote in all our programs and projects. So when it comes to the advocacy against the projects that we had against FGMC, what we did initially was we recruited young people working in the area that we were working at, and we recruited youth champions. So these youth champions that are in a better position to relate to the community, the elders, and that they are also more open to change, more open to hear new things. So what we do is we recruit these change agents, youth champions, or whatever you call them, and then we train them on what we do, why we do what we do, and then what it really is, what are the harmful consequences, and why is it not just a Western agenda, how many people perceive. So once we have this young change agents that understand our causes and the reason why we're trying to advocate against FGMC, it would be easier. It's an easy road down after that. So these young people go to their communities, they hold different outreach campaigns, And also they mobilize the community in different community setups. For example, coffee ceremony, for example, they try to work with their community leaders, elders, and then whatever we told them about harmful consequences of SGMC, for example, they tell them in one of their ceremonies. And it's, like I said, it's easier for them to be understood, and it's easier for the elders to accept them because they're not thinking, okay, they're coming up with a foreign agenda, and it's not, they're here to disrupt the system, or they're not thinking like that. It's not us going there and telling them the problem. So this way, the young people work closely with their own elders, but we use the young people as an entry point. We also have different events, like, for example, intergenerational dialogues, where we bring experts, professors, people that can really talk about the issue, the harmful consequences, medical personnel, and people that have studied about it, and also other young people that can maybe share their own experiences of HGMC. So that through that, the participants and people hearing this dialogue can have a better understanding of the harmful consequences of HGMC. So what's important for us is for the society we are working with to understand. We're not there to change the societal working system or to disrupt the system or anything like that. We're there to help the women, and we're there to fight against the violence that women face. So what we do is to tackle the myths, basically, to tackle the misunderstandings, and that happens through the young people, through the young change agents that are at a better position to understand and work with the community. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lulit. That's really, really helpful. And thank you for giving us the context of how it works in TaYA, and that it's very much youth and sort of that community led, that they're leading those dialogues so that they can lead the change they want to see and better understand female genital mutilations or cutting's role in their society. So thank you for that context. That's really helpful. Mhairi, if you do want to jump in and add anything, do. But if not, I can jump on, move forward to the next question for you.
I would love to jump in, actually, just in response to Lulit, because I think what I didn't manage to say was that when we did our survey, it was the young people who the only ones who didn't show any socially desirable responses. What they said directly and what they said indirectly was exactly the same. And it was very clear that they were the only subsection within the community who didn't endorse the practice. So definitely using young people is definitely the way to go.
Really, really good. Thank you.
Sorry, Kim, just to jump in, I think we've had a request just to slow down a little bit. Sorry. I think we're all very enthusiastic and going a bit quickly. Thank you. Sorry.
Absolutely. Thank you, Natalie. So yeah, panelists, bear in mind that we've got a translator live. So just speak the responses to your questions slow, and leave a little pause for them to catch up. Okay, so Dr. Mhairi, next question for you, please. Your research points to a challenge with traditional research methods for understanding female genital mutilation or cutting, particularly in Ethiopia. What do you see as the next steps for improving understanding of support for FGMC and tackling the issue of social desirability within research?
Yeah, that's a big question, Kimberly. Obviously we need to establish whether these kinds of concealments or attempts to kind of to hide preferences or practices is widespread. And I know that since we published this work in 2016, a number of different organizations have been trying to use these techniques more widely in different communities, in high-risk communities across East Africa. And there's one organization, the FGMC Data Hub, which is part of UN Population Council in Nairobi. And they've been trying to get groups of small expert working groups to get together and to try and trial different indirect approaches. So ours is one method, but there are many others of asking people indirect questions and then trying to measure them against one another to evaluate which might be the best technique. And this might be relevant to small NGOs and advocacy groups as well, because if we can get these techniques to work, then it would be a way of sort of demonstrating change in behavior, or, you know, sort of making sure that funders recognize how much difference they've made. If we can accurately capture people's norms and attitudes, then we've got a better chance of demonstrating change in behavior or practice.
So fascinating. Really, really interesting. Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Dr. Mhairi. Lulit, do you have anything to add to that? Or no? All good. Okay, I will jump to the next question though. It's over to you, Lulit. So within your work with youth advocates at TaYA, how do you see the issue of social identity changing within this generation? And how do the youth you work with view FGMC, and what views do they hold about uncut women and girls and their belonging within their ethnic or social group?
I'm asked to speak about my experience, right? So I was in school not so long ago. So when I was maybe in 5th grade or 6th grade, when we were learning about the traditions and things like that, when we talk about harmful traditional practices, we were taught that the extreme was the first one, and it seems like it was the one that everyone had a consensus on, that it's actually harmful growing up, specifically my experience, right? So now, maybe 20 years after I was in 5th grade, no, maybe 15 years after I was in 5th grade, now when I'm working with other young people, I tend to work with young people in urban areas and young people that have more exposure, that have more access to information and facts. So speaking from my experience, these young people currently, what their understanding is and what their views are about uncut women are more positive. As an example, we had a group of young advocates working on female genital mutilation, and they used to wear a t-shirt that they won't marry someone who's cut or something like that as advocates. So it's actually considered, being cut is actually considered being from a backward area. From my experience, I'm not sure if that's the case in maybe Afar or some other region like the data shows us, but these urban young people that have access to information are more or less, I think it's changing based from what we heard, from what I heard from my parents and from what I heard from elders in my community, and then from what it actually is right now in the community. It has been changing, and I think there have been some positive notes. But like I said, my experience is very limited to the urban areas and very limited to young people that have access to information. And so I wouldn't say that's the case in other regions like Afar and Somali, for example. But it makes me hopeful that with more information, with more access to facts, these young people are changing the narrative and they're changing their minds. So it makes me hopeful that with more work done in these areas as well, we can bring them to our side, and we can change the narrative around uncut women and the values they have in the community.
Amazing. That's such a transformation to when you were at school, huh? And just so interesting to hear, you know, saying t-shirts, you know, saying I'm not going to name the girls that are. That's just a huge transformation, isn't it? In youth. Did you say, was it more in rural areas than urban you saw this?
Yeah, of course. Also, how the data shows us, more people are cut in the rural areas than the urban areas, and more people have more positive attitude towards uncut women in urban areas than the rural areas. So sadly, my experience is very limited to these young people in the urban areas, and that's what I can speak of confidently, because that's what the group of young people I'm working with currently.
Thank you so much. And thank you for speaking from your experience. That's really, really helpful. Mhairi, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't. It's absolutely fascinating to hear first-hand accounts, and it just enriches everything we know from a kind of, you know, data science perspective. So really, really interesting.
Lula, I'm actually going to ask you another question, if that's okay. So TaYA works towards the empowerment of girls, and particularly on enabling access to girls' education alongside their work to end female genital mutilation or cutting. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what the approaches TaYA use to work towards that goal of enabling access to education.
I'm sorry, I really didn't catch your question.
No, that's fine.
Not just my audio quality, but if I'm right, the question is, what are we doing to increase access to education towards girls, right?
Yes, I'll just repeat the question, and then I'll write it up as well, actually. TaYA works towards the empowerment of girls, and particularly in enabling the access to girls' education alongside the work for FGMC. I just wondered what approaches do you use to work towards the goal of sort of more girls accessing education? I'll pop it in the box for you so you can.
Okay.
And so if you need a second to think about it, just let us know. In the box. There we
go. Yes, I got the question now. So the thing is, wherever we go, whenever we have presence in the rural areas, or even in Addis Ababa, the urban setting, we establish youth councils. Like I said initially, we have youth champions, right? So most of our advocacy work at grassroots level is led by these young people. So we try to promote. For example, when it comes to the need for education, for example, the need for equal opportunities for girls, it's not us going to like an old person leading the community and saying, hey, you need to send your daughter to school. We do not say that. So we make sure these young people understand the need for education, and we make sure these young people know why they are advocating for certain causes that we are advocating. So that's always our approach. That's always finding change agents in the communities, and to make sure that our agenda is penetrating into the community, right? When it comes to, that's what we do in grassroots level, but when it comes to our advocacy in high level and policy making, and when it comes to our advocacy in at ministry level, for example, we used to work in a technical working group, for example, for Ministry of Education. We had a technical working group that was advocating for comprehensive sexuality education. We don't really call it that here, but we had a group, we call it Education for Health and Wellbeing. So we had a group a group of experts and other CSOs as well that directly works with Ministry of Education, asking for better access to this information about FGMC included, but also in general about health and life skills and things like that for people going to school, especially girls. So you might know in Ethiopia, like we don't really talk about these things openly, and it's a taboo topic more or less. So what we do is to try and incorporate these topics that young people need to be educated on into the curriculum, and that has been our advocacy activity so far. So our advocacy, like I said, it's both at grassroots level and also goes at policy level. And it depends, the approach is also varying depending on the causes that we are working towards.
It's very interesting to hear how you're working both at the grassroots level, like working to empower youth and help them understand, why they need education and why it's important to them. But as well at that sort of like campaigns and working in that working group, what that looks like on a sort of policy level as well. That's just, amazing work. Thank you so much for sharing. Professor Mhairi, if you have anything to add, please do. If not, I will throw another question at you, if I may. Oh, watch out. So within your study, social desirability bias was particularly high amongst educated men and women. So 5% gave support for continuing FGMC when asked directly, and then 23.8% showed support when asked indirectly. So how do you see the relationship between awareness campaigns, so what Lulit was just talking about, that focuses on the harm of FGMC and the illegality of the practice, and that social desirability bias? Big question.
Tricky questions. Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think listening to Lulit, it sort of clarifies a few things in my mind, and that is that basically you have to have community-based responses. So, you know, dropping education in on its own may lead to unforeseen consequences. But if you're dealing with empowerment, education, economic needs, you know, female autonomy, et cetera, then you're much likely, I think, to get some successful results. I think what our study was just emphasizing the fact that sometimes education alone may not be enough to sort of tip the balance in terms of the costs and benefits to parents and the decision makers about cutting. But once you get female agency and autonomy and all these other things kicking in, then I think there's a potential for, you know, educated women themselves to actually have some control over the decision making about what happens to them at marriage and, you know, related to that, to their cutting.
Yeah, so interesting. So it's that sort of more holistic approach. You know, it can't just come from the top down, it has to come from the grassroots up, and like thinking about the impact of, you know, education, not just on the health impacts, on illegality, but it needs to be in a framework of, you know, encouraging women to have voices and have more autonomy as well. So yeah, it's a holistic approach. So interesting. Fab. Lulit, do you have anything to add to that? If not, I will ask you one more question, if that's okay. Okay, good. So TaYA produced some guidelines for the Ministry of Health in Ethiopia, I mentioned that earlier, on how to engage youth in health projects, including projects that focused on ending FGMC. Can you tell us more about those guidelines that were produced and some of the best practices for engaging youth around the issue of FGMC in Ethiopia, please?
All right, so I think I can confidently say TaYA is a pioneer organization in promoting youth engagement and meaningful and inclusive youth participation in Addis Ababa and also in other settings that we worked on. So we came up with the youth engagement framework with our partner in the Netherlands called Choice for Youth and Sexuality. So that's that framework, that meaningful youth participation framework, we also call it Flower of Participation, has different aspects to it on how young people can be engaged, but engaged meaningfully, not just for the sake of tokenism or manipulation. So it uses a metaphor of a growing flower. Maybe I can share the guideline after this call. So we adopted that framework into Ministry of Health this strategy as well. They were very welcoming, and like I said, we work at policy level advocacy as well, and they were very open to adopt that policy that we had at an organizational level and to ministry level. So using that framework, we were able to develop the first of its kind youth engagement guideline for the Federal Ministry of Health of Ethiopia. So what they do is they use different technicalities. They basically implement what the guideline suggests. And they have established the adolescent youth health case team, which basically focuses on the health of young people, that has its own youth advisors that guide it into how the health projects have to be. So after that, I think this year we had the 4th annual National Adolescent Youth Health Forum based on the recommendation of the guidelines. So during the forum, young people come from all over the country to directly face policymakers and decision makers at the Ministry of Health to ask about their health issues, to present their challenge and to propose solutions and what they would like the Ministry of Health to do in order for them to have a better experience in health as Ethiopian young people. So this is one of the outcomes of the youth engagement guideline. Also the case team, and previously it used to not have a certain budget, a certain priority in the ministry, but now it has its own leader. It has its own. It is more structured, and that's thanks to the youth engagement guideline. It's something we're very, very proud of, and it's something that we plan to transmit into other ministries as well. to other government bodies as well, because like we always say, there's nothing about the young people, there's nothing about youth without youth. So there should be a strategy, there should be a guideline on how to meaningfully incorporate young people's needs, how to meaningfully engage young people in working structures. So we're advocating towards this in other ministries as well, and hopefully we will have positive responses, and that's what we're working towards right now.
Thank you so much, Lulit. That's amazing to hear the work of TaYA and how they influence the policy there, and to hear that you're sharing it with other governments as well. I think it's fundamental, because like you say, with youth, there should be no conversation about them without them. So yeah, it's just really, really inspiring work and really, really helpful. So I think, Dr. Mhairi, you have to jump off now, is that right? So I just want to send a huge thank you to you for joining us today and sharing your incredible insights on your research to end FGMC in Ethiopia. That sort of indirect questioning method, like, it's just fascinating, and we'd love to hear more. But sadly, we have to say goodbye. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Kimberly. It was a pleasure to see you all. Very nice to hear about the research that's going on. And Shannon, congratulations on the report.
Thank you so much for being part of this. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. I'll just let her jump off. But now we're just going to open up the floor to any of the attendees. If you have any questions, please just pop it in the Q&A chat. I think there was we would like to ask the first question again, Lulit, to you. I think we had some difficulties hearing you, or some people had some difficulties. Perhaps maybe just slow it down a little bit as well, so our interpreters have a chance to catch up. So we'll just ask that first question to you now, and please, attendees, pop any other questions that you have in the chat for Lulit, or even for Shannon as well, if there's anything that you'd like to know further about the key findings of the Ethiopia report. Just let us know and we can answer them now. So back to the first question, Lulit, for you. Within your work at TaYA, how have you engaged across generations, working with both youth and elders, to address the issue of FGMC and to shift that narrative of FGMC's role within social identity?
All right, so I'll try to speak as slow as possible, and sorry about that.
Thank you. No, don't be. Teamwork.
Okay. So what I said was TaYA implements a youth adult partnership policy. So, and everything that we do and every project that we have, we make sure that both the views of young people and adults are incorporated, and adults and young people are working in partnership. There is no adults working for young people or young people just working for themselves. There is always partnership in everything that we do. And that's what we implement in our advocacy project against FGMC as well. So in our experience working on this advocacy programs, what we do is we use young people, youth champions as an entry point. So whenever we start implementing a project in a certain area, we go and recruit young people that are more active in their area, that can be heard, that are able to make their voices heard. So after recruiting these young people, we train them, we build their capacity in different aspects, and including the causes that we're working for and why we're doing what we're doing. So usually there is a perception that when you're an aid organization, there is an influence by foreign agenda, and you're there to disrupt the system or to introduce something new that's not really beneficial to the society. But what we make sure that what we're doing is they understand that what we're doing is not really that. We are actually trying to promote women's rights, and we're actually trying to promote development. So initially, our starting point is, like I said, recruiting young people and educating them on our causes, and also how to advocate. We give them basic capacity building training sessions, like how to advocate, work with adults and things like that, also how to ensure meaningful youth participation. And after that, we support them in their outreach campaigns and their community mobilization efforts. And these young people go and penetrate into the society, trying to educate them into the things that we're trying to advocate for. The same is true for our FGM-C project. So when these young people try to bring some new ideas into the society, it's not really perceived, it's not really accepted with a lot of resistance, because they're in part of the society, they live there, they grew up there. So the society is at a better condition to understand what they're saying than if it was us going there and introducing new concepts into the society. So that's what we do. And so, for example, as an example, they make use of coffee ceremonies that these young people, these adults have in their communities. Whenever they have coffee ceremonies or a get together, these young people are also invited. They're also being allowed to be part of it. So in these ceremonies, they try to give them any awareness. They try to give them facts about, like, for example, harmful consequences of FGM-C and how it's not really maintaining what the society thinks it's maintaining. And it's all about introducing them to facts and tackle the myths that have been told since the beginning. So that's one of our ways of working with both adults and young people. And we also have a series of youth-led intergenerational dialogues in both at the urban area and at the rural areas. So these intergenerational dialogues bring together adults that are experts or medical personnel or professors that have enough information about the facts, that are at a better position to be understood than a layman, for example. And we bring these experts that are adults and young people that can share their experiences of, for example, FGM, or that can share the others' experience, their friends' experiences, or anything like that. So we bring together these experts and young people at one place, and then they hold intergenerational dialogue. So this intergenerational dialogue is also expected to create more awareness. And our system, it's not just going directly and saying them, what's FGM? FGM is harmful, types of FGM. It's not like that. We try to be creative around it.
Gosh, that's fascinating. So it's sort of supporting and empowering young people so that they have a voice and the facts, like you say, and then helping them into a space where they can have that conversation with the elders and with the older people. And you've mentioned dialogue, like intergenerational dialogue, that suggests, there's like an open conversation and a two-way thing, to try and shift that social identity of FGM in the community. So that's just, it sounds incredible work, and I would love to be a fly on the wall in one of those discussions, just to hear, what the youth has to say, and also the elders too. That's great and super, super fascinating. Thank you so much, Lulit. I think we don't have any other questions today for you, but you have been an absolutely amazing panelist. Thank you so much for sharing about TaYA and the work you're doing to empower youth in Ethiopia. It's just fascinating. A reminder to all the attendees today, we'll be sending out a recording of this webinar along with the report, the key findings documents, and the resources that the panelists have mentioned as well. So you'll have all the resources and documents you need to further the information that you've hopefully learned or have cemented on this webinar today. This is your last chance just to ask a question if you have one. If not, we will just thank you all for attending. A special thanks to the Orchid Project team and to our wonderful interpreters as well for supporting the launch of this Ethiopia report. Thank you all for coming. And with that, I'm going to wish you all a good day and a goodbye. Thank you.